This is the newly updated Tesla Model S Plaid, and in this video, we'll talk about everything it can do, not just the acceleration. We're talking about the software, the new seats and the steering wheel, testing higher speeds, testing the autopilot and the actual consumption, and we're testing the automatic gear shift, where I just need to brake, steer and drive without having the requirement of ever selecting a gear manually. We charge from 10 to 80% here, and also here we talk about the design, the price and the competition, and we test the light. And with that, hey, and a warm welcome to this exciting new video here at Journos, and welcome to another everyday test of the Tesla Model S Plaid in the updated version, now in the 2024 to 25 model year with new hardware, but most importantly, new software. And that was decisive for me to say I want to take another look at it, see what has changed and whether the vehicle can now hold its own more effectively against the competition out there. And together, we'll clarify this in this video. If you don't want to miss such things in the future, I'd really appreciate it if you would. A free subscription would be greatly appreciated. It really helps me a lot to produce videos like this one for you. They're relatively time-consuming, so feel free to subscribe for free, and let's take another quick look at the car from the outside. The Tesla Model S will continue to be manufactured solely in the USA, just like the X and notably the Cybertruck, which leads to some manufacturing issues we'll look at later. To begin with, let's discuss the lights. They were enhanced and upgraded with advanced matrix functions for existing vehicles through a software update. I'll refer to it in layman's terms as the matrix functionality, which allows the system to intelligently and sequentially dim the lights when it detects oncoming traffic or vehicles ahead. The Tesla manages well overall. While it feels a bit rough and isn't as polished as Audi, VW or Mercedes, it still serves its intended purpose and delivers consistently reliable performance, since the oncoming lane is consistently kept completely hidden, as you can clearly see here. And when a vehicle drives into this cone of light, you'll notice that the upper area is still being left out completely. I've never encountered the issue of an oncoming vehicle flashing their high beams at me, whether I'm driving on the highway or here on country roads, because they were blinded by my vehicle's lights. So Tesla actually does this sensibly, and that's a lot better than the extremely poor automatic dimming that used to exist. Unfortunately, Tesla doesn't turn it off when driving through urban areas. Otherwise, the limousine that measures just over 5 meters in length is truly well positioned, and you would not suspect at all that its design is still largely oriented towards the very first Model S. The optional 21-inch wheels, they look quite decent with the standard brakes, but the door handles seem really way too loud for my taste. That could have been improved significantly. There are cameras all around the vehicle, and now with hardware 4, they are even higher resolution and more precise, and the overhangs are almost large for an electric car. The gap dimensions and alignments unfortunately don't fit correctly at the backlights. They are noticeably different on the left side compared to the right side. The trunk lid appeared slightly misaligned for me, which is something that could definitely be adjusted, and the Tesla branding, it's now the only feature at the rear since the logo is no longer there. Personally, I genuinely find the looks of the vehicle to be quite appealing, especially with this carbon spoiler and the big plaid logo. In the back, we of course have to talk about the trunk. It's just becoming increasingly important to me as a dad that it's properly big. And with almost 800 liters, you really have without a doubt the most spacious trunk volume available in this entire class. That divides into the truly spacious area up here, where for instance a stroller can comfortably fit lengthwise without any issues. Additionally then, it's positioned on the left side, but there's also a lot of space here in the lower area. You can fit several crates of water in that area, or for instance travel bags when you're traveling or on the go. And yet this vehicle manages to have space for 2 engines situated behind it, so it's truly quite remarkable indeed. This attaches magnetically, which I think is quite nice. It would just be cool if it could somehow flip up with it. During the testing phase, I mostly left it sitting back there. You have the option to fold the rear seats down in a split of 40 to 60 for extra space and convenience whenever needed. And that's not all, there's also the frunk, meaning the front trunk, where you've got plenty of space. Not just for a charging cable or an energy kick. No, you can easily fit another travel bag in there, and really, this car offers an impressive amount of space. The main hardware change has happened here because the seats I'm sitting on are completely new and redesigned. For the very first time, this version of the Model S receives the highest performance variant available, offering an elevated level of driving experience. Also different seats compared to the base version, and they really stand out. Visually, they strongly resemble BMW seats, offering significantly better lateral support and a nice flat monogram right here in the headrest to remember. Visually, it's a bit like the new seats in the Tesla Model 3 Performance, and with the introduction of the new Model 3 Performance, there were also these here in the Model S, and they are really well done with, I don't know if it's Alcantara or just microfiber in any case on the side, still with ventilation and heating. That's really quite nice. Just the way this fabric matches here and then having a different fabric in the door, that doesn't really quite work out. Otherwise, the interior is characterized by carbon, whether it's in this center paneling or also correspondingly at the front in the instrument panel. That also transitions nicely directly into the door, and generally speaking, the material impression is really good. And here too, now with over 10,000 kilometers on the clock, nothing creaks yet, and that's not something to be taken for granted. Briefly regarding the display here, it's one of the largest displays you can currently find in any vehicle, and it can tilt flexibly in both directions. I'll show you the software here, we'll cover it later, as diving into it now would extend this segment too much. Before that, let's talk about the display situated right behind the steering wheel. It's impressively nice and incredibly crisp. You can tell a bit that the car wasn't originally designed for a round steering wheel because at the top, it always cuts in a bit, and it's already at the highest setting, and I'm already at the lowest seat position, and I'm only 1.73 meters tall. Over its production life cycle, the steering wheel was available in a round version within the series, while offering the distinctive yoke style as an optional feature only, which sparked a significant amount of discussions and conversations. What's new here, however, is the key assignment, not the feedback, so still the indicator buttons here on the left and right, then for example the windshield wiper. Now there's also a camera button here, which is new, and the horn is now centered on the impact plate and not a small button anymore. I find that quite charming because we've already seen that with Model 3, that it exists and that they're now incorporating it into Model S as well. I find only logical because it just makes it better and more intuitive. And that brings us to the second row of seats, and I'll just drop myself into the seat here because please correct me if you know something different. But I truly and honestly believe this is currently the lowest seat bench you can find in any limousine of this type today. An EQA i5 and whatever they're all called out there are significantly higher. Here, you really fall into the car, which ensures you have an extreme amount of space above. Also naturally due to the glass roof, which extends behind me. However, you do sit quite low, but as a result, your legs are positioned slightly upwards since the distance from the seat surface to the floor is not quite as elevated. The seats offer similarly good lateral support as the front ones, which I always find very good, and they are now visually adapted to the front design. Would be strange if it were different in the middle, so one pull doesn't always work, unfortunately. Now there's a center armrest which includes carbon integration, 2 cup holders and 2 wireless charging pads, along with a convenient storage compartment located behind it. And you can also fold them down when you're using the ISOFIX points, as they are unfortunately not available on the rear seats, but they can be hidden with a nice mechanism. And there, the car seat fits comfortably thanks to ISOFIX and also the center armrest. One could theoretically sit in the middle as well, but you're noticeably higher there, so it has a completely different ergonomics, and there's a very nice large display where you can control the air conditioning, but you can also listen to music, stream videos directly onto it, and even with Bluetooth headphones nowadays, that you don't disturb those in front. The feel of the material back here is exactly the same as in the front, which I find very pleasant. It's a pity that the only ambient lighting in the entire vehicle is in the storage pockets. It would really benefit the car, especially now that we know it from the new Model 3. It seems quite dark here at night. That about covers the seating comfort and the interior features. I'll proceed now and we'll discuss the driving feel in more detail. We start a bit differently than perhaps expected, not with acceleration, but with the topic of parking. And it's quite interestingly done because I get a display in front of me showing where there is currently a parking spot. I can then select it with the right steering wheel, confirm, and then the car parks itself. I am now able to select the parking spot next to me and let the car handle it all by itself. It's not easy since I'm not ideally positioned. Also, there's a car coming from behind. Now I have to step in because otherwise we would have ended up taking him with us. And currently he's actually handling the situation in a very proper and competent manner. He sees the parking space well, always driving in consistently backward. I was able to test it with various parking scenarios during the test period. So both when there are vehicles next to you and when there aren't any, the vehicle really handles it exceptionally well. And it's not only limited to such parking lots, but also when you find yourself parked parallel to the street. But that's not everything, because now there is automatic gear shifting available. That simply means stepping on the brake, the car sees, hey, I want to reverse out. Shifts it into reverse gear for me. That option was already possible from a standstill. Whenever I brake right here and turn the steering wheel to the right, it automatically shifts itself into drive mode completely on its own without any action from me. And that's incredibly practical because it enables one to completely bypass the manual gear shifting process on this display in numerous typical everyday driving scenarios. And I find that quite exciting because it works here in the Model S, but in the Model 3 it's not available yet. Now let's move on to acceleration, and here you can activate what's called drag strip mode. This means the vehicle will then be fully prepared for the highest performance. Sounds insanely loud from the outside. But it means that at the start, you click gas and brake, the vehicle indicates that it's ready, goes into cheetah stance and catapults you forward. The best time I managed to record in this section during the test phase was an impressive 2.5 seconds to accelerate from 0 to 100 kilometers per hour. Tesla on their own part claims 2.1 seconds, so you're quite significantly far off from that. We had the opportunity to test that for you back in the summer during the experiment with the track package at that time. While we got closer, we never actually reached the value. With winter tires, I believe it's nearly impossible to achieve it, but the car does really demonstrate its power. It's a concentrated, intense kind of power that truly impresses. It's important to clearly acknowledge that because other manufacturers such as Audi and Porsche, with their innovative active suspensions, are able to push you down more effectively onto the road. The cheetah stance I mentioned earlier serves a very specific purpose as the vehicle is pushed down as low as possible. Tesla knows very well that it lifts significantly and noticeably right after the start. And to counteract that, there's this particular cheetah mode feature. Nevertheless, you only really benefit from it during the actual beginning of a drag race event. From 0 to 100, 0 to whatever speed. And I honestly find that I miss that bit of excitement in everyday life. Because if I fully step on it at 80 here, the vehicle really shoots forward with noticeable power. And you notice that less with other manufacturers, they can counter that more effectively. Yes, we have an air suspension here. Yes, there are different heights that you can adjust, that you can level, but they're just not enough to counter the forces that become possible here with over 1,000 horsepower. And that's where the competition is already ahead in suspension tech. Let's briefly discuss the competitors in the market and the pricing of their models. The Tesla Model S Plaid begins at a price of 109,000 euros or 108,000 euros. If you go ahead and use my referral link located below the video, you'll save a total of 1,000 euros on every Tesla model order you make. Whether it's pre-configured or newly ordered vehicles, the long-range variant, which comes with slightly reduced power and only 2 motors, is offered at just under 90,000 euros. It's really an exceptionally attractive option for the price you pay. And what is there in this environment? Of course, there's a Porsche Taycan for well over 150,000 euros. There's an RS e-tron GT, which performance-wise reaches Audi's level. It starts at 160,000 euros. If you don't want quite as much performance, you can go for an i5 M60 or an EQE in the AMG variant, and they all cost around 100,000 to 110,000 euros. So all within this price range. But there's a special feature, namely this one behind me. It already includes absolutely everything you might need: the glass roof, the matrix headlights, the seats, essentially covering everything except for the track package. You should really upgrade that. He doesn't have it here now, but we were able to test it for you. I'll provide a link up there. It's worth considering. Bigger brakes let you reach a top speed of up to 320 kilometers per hour. The other cars just have a long list of features that they sometimes end up at 150, 160,000 euros if you add everything. And that's not the case with this one because there's only a white or a black interior. The white one costs extra and the exterior colors cost something. And that's pretty much it. That means purely in terms of price performance, it beats all the others. But as I said, with some suspension tuning, you can tell where you pay more for the especially German premium manufacturers. Now, about the driving experience, during the week I had the car, I drove on various roads. Now, right here on a road that's approximately 1.5 lanes in width, you really have to carefully swerve quite a bit because the car is indeed quite wide. Yes, it's indeed quite wide. This can certainly be a disadvantage, for example, with car washes, parking garages, and similar places. The car boasts a very wide track and large tires, and you can definitely feel it, but you also absolutely need it to effectively get the power onto the road. The vehicle's suspension is an air suspension system, which is capable of being adjusted to various positional setups. In everyday life, I typically relied on automatic mode, but on country roads, I tended to favor the comfort setting to effectively counteract the many bumps, and the vehicle truly performs exceptionally well in this aspect. And it's still quite firmly tuned, so no matter how comfortable you want to set this up. It's still quite a stiff suspension setup, but that's perfectly okay because honestly, if you're going for a Tesla Model S Plaid, you want to drive in a sporty manner, and then it really should definitely be firmer than, for example, a comparable EQS, which usually comes across as very soft, even in the AMG variant, despite being marketed as sporty overall. So it's these spreads that the manufacturers are aiming for. In everyday life, you can really drive around comfortably with this car. We had consumption values of about 16, 17 kilowatt hours when you're just driving in the city with a bit of country roads. But we'll get to the consumption figures at the very end of the video, as we always split this deliberately to give you a good impression here. That's precisely why we're now discussing the seating comfort, and it's consistently great in every scenario. No matter if it's curves, country roads, or long stretches on the highway, it's really fun in here. They are very, very well differentiated. That means I have a cheek that presses very hard against my thigh, keeping me in the seat. But still, there's a relatively soft seat cushion, which makes sure that I can drive comfortably over long distances and not get slid out on winding, curvy roads. And that's a major advantage when compared to the previous version, In contrast to its predecessor, there's now a brand new camera button conveniently located on the steering wheel. I find it really cool. I also like it in the Model 3. Quickly displaying the camera image directly here, for example, to see where the curb or the edge of the pavement is. Regardless, it's indeed intuitive and it makes things noticeably easier in a variety of different areas. Since we're here with the software, let's briefly check the display again. You can genuinely notice at every point how fast this processor is. With nearly 17 inches, the display is quite large and beautifully high resolution, handling all tasks effortlessly, regardless if you're zooming in on the map or doing other tasks. You never experience any stuttering at all. Personally, I think the route planning is great as it's quite intuitive, consistently incorporates charging stops at Tesla superchargers, and computes everything rather swiftly. Unfortunately, I now lack the settings, like the minimum charge at the charging stop or at the destination. That could be improved. Typical for Tesla, there are various apps that are constantly being expanded. At the moment, you have access to the Spotify app, and there's definitely plenty of entertainment and fun to be enjoyed beyond just that. The Steam beta and a selection of various Tesla games are readily available, offering entertainment while charging or letting kids have fun playing beach buggy racing, for instance. If you aren't interested in that, there's another option with the Tesla Theater, where you have access to Netflix, Disney+, or even YouTube. This way you can have plenty of entertainment and avoid slipping into boredom during the charging break. I usually work while charging, and for that the Zoom app is available here in the vehicle, which can then also access the camera. The climate control system continues to be operated solely through touch across 4 distinct zones, and it can easily be managed remotely via the Tesla app, providing added user convenience. This has a cool widget for iOS and all sorts of features. Not only can you drive the vehicle with the app alone, no, you can also control the climate with all its cool functions directly through it. But even with that, there's more to it. Because for example, in the Sentry mode, you have the ability to view live camera feeds directly from the car, or you receive notifications if something unusual or strange is detected. Furthermore, there's the option to purchase upgrades which were already installed here. You can, for example, set the charging limit, which is quite practical at home, and now there's also the schedule. He is not only able to precondition the car, but also to schedule the charging. In everyday life, I must honestly admit I would much prefer drive more often in casual or sport mode and skip the places, simply because the car then uses up significantly less energy. The problem, however, is that there's no kickdown, so if I'm driving in chill mode and step on the pedal, it accelerates quite well, but you never really get that true electric punch. Perhaps it's a balance Tesla is considering, deciding, okay, if the systems aren't tuned for full performance, then we won't allow it, because otherwise it would call up everything too abruptly, and maybe the motors aren't set up for that. For whatever reason, I find it unfortunate as other manufacturers simply provide that feeling or the option to drive more relaxed in everyday life whenever it's needed, fulfill the full power expected by customers. Unfortunately, that's not the case here. That would be cool if it could somehow be fixed via software, because that would take the car to a whole new level, as you would use significantly less in everyday life while still having fun or the performance. When you need them in the respective situations, I think we can't avoid it. We need to talk about using the indicator here in the roundabout. I just remember it's always the lower one, and then I can also signal to exit, and it actually becomes second nature faster, as perhaps some critics might imagine. In my daily driving experiences, I find using the blinkers for turns really intuitive and straightforward, and quite often I get into another vehicle and think, why do I have the levers back here? In the roundabout, it's still kind of tricky, but this division helps quite a bit. Let's take a closer look at how the autopilot functions within the city now. Let's see, it's a relatively tight curve and it actually manages to handle it quite well. It's quite reasonable overall, but I should definitely add a disclaimer here. To be honest, I wouldn't really feel comfortable relying on the autopilot for navigating in urban situations. That's simply not the safest approach you can take, even though right now it detects the cars parked or just stopped ahead of me quite well. And even if it generally manages to stop at traffic lights because it's capable of that here with the enhanced autopilot features available in the Model S version, like we're testing here for you, I often have strange situations. Traffic lights that are actually only for left turns are detected for me, then it suddenly brakes. Sometimes he's not certain if a stop sign really applies to me or not, and he doesn't always maintain perfect lane alignment. He really does it well, especially right now in such an industrial area where there's no middle lane. He keeps me perfectly in the right lane, recognizes and assesses using the cameras, and does it even without swarm data. In some places it's a bit hesitant and it's not actually an autopilot. Tesla calls it that, but the steering is only in beta status. ADD, and you just can't rely on it entirely. Honestly speaking, I wouldn't feel very comfortable using assisted driving in these kinds of situations. because there are just too many variables that the car simply can't perfectly assess, even though it really does an amazingly good job here and the system keeps getting better. 2 years ago, when I first tested it, I discovered it wasn't especially great, not even in the Model S. Now it's braking for some reason, so it's better to take control and drive on my own. It's significantly smoother when you're on the highway. In my opinion, the lane keeping technology is really one of the most precise available, as the car consistently stays perfectly centered. Held in the middle is also a point of criticism because other manufacturers now allow you to learn, hey, I'd like to be further left or further right in the lane. With Tesla, everything is always centralized, and that means, for example, you don't have an emergency corridor assistant or anything like that. And that's really something I would want, particularly when a company prides itself on aiming to achieve fully autonomous driving in the near future. While he's chatting away, I'm going to proceed and carefully shift the track slightly further over to the left side. Lane change assistance, and in my opinion, they're somewhat on the slower side. We are now familiar with systems from Volkswagen, Audi, as well as other manufacturers, such as BMW, where these days I can completely disregard the phone, just take a look at the mirror, and it will perform the lane change automatically. I'm not demanding that here yet, but I would really like it if it could operate much more smoothly and at a significantly faster pace. If you don't have the advanced autopilot features enabled, like we have here in this situation, then you have to manually reactivate the autopilot system after each lane change. Reactivate it. Although the distance cruise control remains consistently active, the lane keeping assist experiences an interruption. This occurs because changing lanes crosses the boundary, so you will need to manually confirm and re-engage it. That's somewhat annoying during longer stretches of driving, so I generally prefer to utilize the active lane change assistant feature instead. Since it's slow, I often step in and need to reset it. So sometimes it's a shame about those, I think, 3,500 euros extra, which the enhanced autopilot, as, mind you, just a software upgrade actually costs. There's also the option to navigate with the autopilot. Then, the line in front of me is no longer blue on the outside, but rather, you get a line, and the car basically pulls me along and gives me recommendations. When I have to exit, it provides a suggestion that I should change lanes at this point, or if the vehicles ahead are moving far too slowly, since the car is aware that I'll be driving straight for quite a long time, for instance. Then it displays to me, for example, that I need to switch over to the right lane because my exit is approaching soon, and I can accomplish that by indicating right. Confirm accordingly, and then the car searches for the next available gap. But as you can see, there is quite a lot of traffic here, and unfortunately the car doesn't manage because the gaps aren't suitable. So, as a result, I have to take over control myself. However, the system continues driving all the way to the next intersection after the exit ramp. The official limit on the highway is at a speed of 280. However, the car is limited to 270 due to the winter tires. To be completely honest, I really didn't know there are tires available with such particular load requirements. Yet now, while driving at a speed of 200 kilometers per hour and lightly pressing the pedal, it genuinely pulls you back into the seat forcefully. That's the kind of thing you usually don't expect from electric cars, that they can maintain such strong acceleration even at high speeds. However, you notice a difference in the interior acoustics because from around 180 kilometers per hour, the car's active noise cancelling just can't keep up anymore. Now I actually have to swallow a bit because there's this pressure sensation on my ears since the car employs active noise cancelling technology, which means all surrounding ambient noises are within, thus essentially creating a significantly more tranquil and serene, quiet interior space, at least most of the time. The footwell remains relatively loud when compared to other premium vehicles, and from this small window located in the door at the A-pillar, the wind breaks so strongly through that area that the car simply can't manage it effectively. But overall, you can truly drive longer distances at higher speeds with confidence here because the suspension system and the exceptionally long wheelbase perform exceptionally well, providing a smooth and stable ride. Managed to achieve that. I've generally been here now, let's take a look, with the suspension mode set to automatic. That signifies the car adjusts itself quite well on its own, whether it should be more comfortable or more sporty. You can definitely notice that at higher speeds, the car simply feels much sportier and as a result sits more firmly and securely on the road. Around 150, it becomes noticeably more comfortable, which is quite nice, but I can, of course, adjust it to suit my preferences. It's important to note that in terms of travel comfort, this is already functioning at a very high level, providing remarkable ease and luxury, and that it can truly stand its ground impressively against other brands, which are frequently much more expensive if you want a comfortable interior experience, particularly when driving long distances at elevated speeds on highways. Now onto the topic of charging, the Tesla Model S Plaid, just like the long-range variant, can be charged at a maximum of 250 kWh. Note that this is only at Tesla's own superchargers, because thanks to an increased amperage, it's possible here to achieve the charging power, even though it's just a 400-volt system. To bring it back up, to rev it up, But in the charging test here, I could only see just over 230 kWh, and that led to a total charging time of 30 minutes and 30 seconds to go from 10 to 80%. Noted! And I stopped it on my watch. Let's see how the situation is when using non-Tesla charging stations. And even though I know that this is quite a rare sight, that is a Tesla at an IONITY charging station, and I forget every time that the trunk opens. Who's approaching from behind? That's quite a nice feature. Closing it again once, it's incredibly impractical for the moderation, but replaces this footpath. Now, onto the topic of charging. I know you'll rarely see a Tesla here because the route planning is only set up for supercharger stations, at least with the automatic route planning. You can select the column, but hardly anyone does. And on the other hand, with a Tesla at the Tesla supercharger station, it's just cheaper. So this is more of an exception here. For me, it was quite exciting because I was able to charge the car from 10 to 80% in 29.5 minutes. 1 minute quicker than Tesla itself, and towards the end, the charging curve proved to be much better. Instead of charging at around 60 kilowatts with Tesla, I had almost 80 here. And I found that quite interesting because the column itself only went up to 214 kilowatts, which is around 40% in the same range. Ultimately, you can certainly say that the car typically charges from 10 to 80% in about 30 minutes. And that's exactly what we were able to find out for you back then during the long distance test with the regular long range variant. I think that's an okay value. What do you guys think? Feel free to write it in the comments. Now we are moving on to a conclusion, and this will actually be a bit longer because we still need to talk about fuel consumption, and there are 1 or 2 points we have left out. On one hand, the topic of parking sensors. The Model S still comes without parking sensors. It calculates everything based on cameras now, but it works well and accordingly just as good. That yes, the auto park is working again, and if you dare to try it, the distances should fit well, then you'll get quite a nice 3D image display of it. Then there's the one-pedal driving capability, which operates exceptionally well in the car up to a state of charge of approximately 95%, I'd have to say. Exceeding that point, the car slows down less, so you might likely find you need to use the brake pedal somewhat more often than usual. I had a problem with the tires because the winter tires here, the P0 Winter, are unfortunately very, very loud. From 180, they just roar, even though they're allowed to go 270. And I had some noise at the front and a weird vibration. About the accelerator, but for the first time with a Tesla Model S Plaid, I don't know if it's the tires or the drive shafts. And then we come to the consumption values. For that, we took a regular driving route, predominantly consisting of overland journeys, covering a distance of approximately 130 kilometers, and recorded an energy consumption value of just slightly over 19 kilowatt hours. That's reasonable when you take into account having 3 motors, but not entirely satisfactory when you consider that I was driving in chill mode. After that, I proceeded to drive at a constant speed of 130 kilometers per hour on the highway for you, traversing the route back and forth to really balance out the elevation differences. The vehicle, according to the onboard computer, registered a consumption of 21.9 kilowatt hours, and because you always comment so actively, yeah, but at the charging station and Tesla glosses over that, and here and there I've left the charging station with 80% and then returned to the charging station and charged again to 80%. The car said that I used 25 kilowatt hours on this trip. The charging station has added 28 kilowatt hours. The calculated consumption would then be at 24.7 kilowatt hours instead of 21.9. Bear in mind, however, that this includes charging losses, which always depend on the cable and the charging station, not just the car, and is of course the factor you need to pay. Because in fact, you would need to recharge the energy. The motor actually consumes only the 21.9 kilowatt hours of energy that is available in the charged vehicle. I would always like to differentiate a bit, and all other manufacturers also charge, nor the charging losses in their range. That's why, in my view, the consumption figures are indeed quite telling for real-world performance. So 21.9 purely from the engine consumption values, and that means in everyday life, realistically, at 130 kilometers per hour with normal traffic flow, no construction sites in that segment, just consistently 130 kilometers per hour from here to Augsburg towards Stuttgart and back, in case any of you would like to know the route we traveled, and with that he can realistically cover a distance of well over 400 kilometers. And after the initial charging stop, it's still nearly 400 kilometers. Honestly, I'm perfectly fine with that. And ultimately, it should definitely be said in this video that the car is truly, really in outstanding shape. And that's why here's just a conclusion from me at this point, because you often request it. I think that for the price, you won't get anything else. But I believe that if someone really wants performance and doesn't just rely on the actual 0 to 100 time, but also on suspension, downforce behavior and other factors, you'll definitely be better off in other vehicles, such as the RS e-tron GT Performance or perhaps even a Porsche Taycan. There are various options out there, but they all easily cost at least double the price of this one if you want every last feature. And accordingly, I think that in most cases you can't get around this one here. And I occasionally meet Tesla drivers who are charging at the station and they're all thrilled. And that is ultimately what's important. Feel free to check below the video at Tessie Supply if you want to save 10%. Check below the video if you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, or if you want a €1,000 discount on a Tesla. Also, check my test above, the track package, which boosts the car. And down here, you'll find my last test of the Tesla Model 3 performance. Almost as fast from 0 to 100, but significantly cheaper.